All right, so that's what, so we both started applying. I started applying in grad school. Is that when you applied, or did you wait till after you got out of grad school?
I applied the first time the year you got selected in '96 for. I applied for that round, but I was still at the time. The requirements were you had to have a master's degree and like 2 years related work experience. And I tried to convince them that like being a TA, a teaching assistant for 2 years, was work experience. So I tried, and but I didn't get too far that year. But I got called down for an interview the next time around.
And that interview, that was for you. That was the astronaut class after mine in 1998. That's when you got your interview.
That's when I got my
and
interview.
then you got picked. So you got picked pretty quick. That's pretty quick.
Well, I had a unique strategy.
What was that?
My strategy was to try to get so let me back up a second. When at the time that we interviewed, there was just one interview that during the week, and it was like a 45-minute thing, and that was really like make or break. It was like whatever happens. So it's a really kind of high stress thing. I have scientific evidence, empirical evidence, to show you just how stressful it was, because you wear that one day, you wear this Holter monitor, so you're wired up like an EKG, and they're monitoring your heartbeat for an entire day. And you're not supposed to exercise or even go up like a flight of stairs while you're wearing this thing. You're supposed to be very relaxed the whole day while they're watching every single one of your heartbeats. And at the end, you get debriefed, and they're like, "Wait a minute, we see your pulse rate got up to 175." I'm like, 175? I'm going to be 175. They're like, I'm like, what? Wait a minute, what time was it? They're like, oh, it's 11:55 a.m. on Thursday. And I'm like, because my interview was at noon. So that was me, my heart pounding, standing outside the door. It's pretty terrifying. So, and the guy that was in charge, I think same for you, was John Young, right?
He was the head. Yeah, we should set up a little bit, Garrett, is that what you're describing is when we interviewed, it has changed a little bit now where they have like a part 1 and part 2 interview. But with us, back in our day, it was 1 week of meeting people and a lot of medical exams. But that interview you're talking about, the actual was an interview with the selection board that you're there with 20 other candidates. So everyone's interviewing at a different time during the week. And so you had yours apparently on a Thursday with the Holter monitor. And John Young, tell us who John Young was.
John Young, he was like the astronaut's astronaut. I mean, he's like a legend. So he flew the first flight of Gemini with Gus Grissom. He flew to the moon in Apollo twice. He flew in Apollo 10 and didn't land, so he went back on another Apollo mission and walked on the moon. And then he was the commander of the first space shuttle mission, Young and Crippen, in 1981. They flew the very first flight of the space shuttle. So this guy, and I knew, like, walking in there, he was not going to be impressed with the fact that I was captain of my high school wrestling team. All right, that was not going to impress this guy. So, so my strategy was to try to get him to laugh. That was my strategy. And I accomplished that in the first 5 minutes of the interview. So I was feeling confident, and the interview went well. So that's if you ask me why.
How did you do this? And just so you know, folks, John Young passed a few years ago. Absolute hero, wonderful guy. But I don't really know if it'd be easy to make him laugh. So how did you accomplish that?
Well, it was a gamble, but it turns out he has a great sense of humor. You just got to like get past the crusty, curmudgeonly exterior, but underneath he's actually a super funny guy. He could be on this. He could have been on this podcast. We could have made it 3 funny astronauts. So he could have been with us because he's actually got a great sense of humor. And so I walked in there, and I didn't have a plan for how I was going to make him laugh. I just wanted to try to accomplish that. So he looks at me as I sit down. And he goes, "So, son, how's it going?" And I said, well, to be honest, it's going a lot better than my last job interview. And he says, he goes, "Really? Why is that?" And I said, because this time I remembered my pants. It's a true story. I had a job interview when I was wrapping up my graduate studies at Caltech at TRW, which is an aerospace company that is now part of Northrop Grumman, but there's this big aerospace company down here. And I had to drive from Pasadena to the west side of LA during rush hour and to be there in time for my interview. And I thought I was being really smart. I said, okay, I was dating this girl at the time that lived near there, and I'll stay at her parents' house with her, and I'll wake up in the morning and then I have a short drive, and I won't be late for my interview. So I get up and everything was going great. I get up in the morning, everything is fine. And I open my suitcase and I got my suit jacket, I got my tie, my dress shirt, my dress shoes, no pants. I forgot the pants, no pants. So I went to the interview wearing all that, like the dress shirt, the tie, and powder blue jeans. All right. That's all I had. and I thought, this is terrible. And I'm like hiding behind podiums and stuff as I'm giving the talk, and so I don't see my pants. But then I realized that these were all aerospace engineers, right? They don't know anything about fashion. They don't care. Nobody even noticed, you know. But I did. I signed all my thank you notes. You know, I wrote thank you notes to the guys that interviewed me. And I said, thank you for the opportunity, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, if you hire me, I promise to take the first paycheck and go out and buy a decent pair of pants. So I told that to John Young, and he laughed, and that was that.
That's pretty good. That's a funny story. You are a funny astronaut.
Hey, takes one to know one.
It's a good story.
But it really, if I'm funny, it really comes from my dad. It's genetic. And my dad was super funny, and I just wanted to slide this quick story in here, because talking about John Young reminded me about it. So there's a John Young Expressway in Orlando. So John Young was from Orlando, Florida, and so there's an expressway that runs like through Orlando, where he was from, and it kind of runs past near the Space Center down there at Kennedy Space Center, and it's big, you know, big signs, John Young Expressway. If you go to Orlando, you'll see it. And one day, my dad was visiting in Houston, and we started walking through. I took him out to Ellington Airfield, where we keep the T-38 jets, and I was taking him through our base operations and our ready room, and where we brief before we go out and fly these like little fighter jets. And as I'm taking him through on a tour, I look up, and there's John Young getting ready to go fly. And I turned to my dad, knowing my dad, I'm like, Dad, don't embarrass me. Just you know, it's John Young, okay? The guy, don't say, I'm going to introduce you, but just behave, okay? And so I introduced him to John Young. He shakes John Young's hand, and I said, "This, you know, Captain Young, this is my father." And my dad looks at him right in the eye, and he goes, "John Young, huh?" I said, "I drove on your road." He goes, "By the way, there's some litter over mile marker 23. You might want to have somebody get on that, clean that place up."
What did John Young say to that?
He laughed. And we'll have to have another podcast episode with John Young stories. I got a couple.
Well,
more.
I've got one I've got to tell now, and so what the heck? We don't have any structure for this anyway. But he was this very accomplished guy who had flown, like he walked on the moon. I remember him as a kid. I remember him flying on Apollo 10 down to the surface. I think it was Apollo 16 he was on when he walked on the moon. And he was in any first space shuttle, as you said, you said all these accomplishments. And when we joined, Garrett, right, I was selected in 96. You came in right the next class in 98. And he was still an active astronaut. Not only was he head of the selection board, but he was an active astronaut and still flying a T-38. Did you ever get to flying a T-38 with him?
Yes. And we almost died.
All right. So I couldn't believe how lucky we were to get a chance to work with this hero. You know, he was one of us. You know, he'd see him in the gym and talk to him in the office, and he was just this great guy. And I remember telling him, I go, look, you know, John, when you're flying T-38, and when we were trained, just for the audience to know, Garrett, you're a very accomplished pilot. I have some hours I'm a private pilot as well, but not as many as you. You have your own airplane and so on. But we were trained to be co-pilots in the T-38 to fly with our astronaut test pilot comrades, and also the instructor pilots out at Ellington Field that we had. And John Young was, of course, an astronaut pilot, a test pilot. So he would fly in the front seat of the airplane, and one of us would fly in the back. And so for early on, I went to him and said, you know, John, if you ever have an open back seat, I would be honored to fly with you. And he goes, okay, Mike, you know. And sure enough, like a couple of days later, he pokes his head in my office. He goes, Mike, what are you doing next week on Wednesday? And I go, why? He said, I'm flying out to Ames Research Center, which was out in California. And so from Houston, it was a few hops. We landed we stopped in El Paso and in Vegas, and out to fly the simulator out in California. They had a vertical motion simulator that we would go fly out there. And he said, and we'll go. He goes, I got to go. He goes, but I go and come. I go there and back in one day, which is kind of unusual because it's like 6 flights to get out there, you know, to go there and come back. And so he's like, we got to leave really early in the morning. And I'm like, okay. So I was like, this is great. So I, you know, cleared off the whole day and got there very early. And you know, we taxi out there. It was funny things were happening the whole day, but the highlight was coming back. And I had spent the whole day with this guy. And got a chance to learn from him in the simulator, and I got him telling stories. You know, it was getting late at night. You know, the sun. We were like over New Mexico or someplace where there's no chatter on the over the radio. You know, no, they just, you know, you just for a while you just the two of you up there talking at a high altitude. It was a beautiful. Sun was starting to go down. Just a beautiful end to a day. And I started asking him stuff about, you know, what it was like back in the day, and he told me some of the stories about going to the White House with his family, which were kind of funny, and some of the guys he worked, some of the astronauts back then. And so then I finally worked up the courage to ask him, what was it like on the moon? You know, and now this is my chance. You know, here's one of the only 12 people that ever walked on the moon, and I'm here with him. And I said, John, tell me, what was it like? What was it like when you got on the moon? What was that like? And you know, he had this sort of southern drawl to him when he spoke, and he said, well, Mike, I tell you, the best thing about it is you finally could take a dump. I was like, what? You know, I was expecting to hear something like, I saw God. I saw something. I contemplated on what humanity was about. And I'm like, you know, I looked at the earth and it was so small, you know, something like that. And he goes, and that's what he tells me. And I go, what? And he goes, well, you know, Mike, you don't know yet. You haven't been in space yet. But when you're floating around in space and you're zero gravity, you know, sometimes you just get bunged up. Nothing's regular. You can't go. But you get on that moon and that's that 1/6 gravity, and you finally can let loose. And I was like, holy cow! But that's kind of was him. You know, always kind of downplay everything. But that's what it was like. That's what it was like. That's what he wanted to tell me about the moon. But he told me some great stories that day. And it was great, as you say, it was great getting a chance to know him and being friends with him was such an honor, such a great guy.
I remember I had a similar experience in the T-38 with him. So we went down to the Cape once, and we didn't do it all in one day. We stayed overnight, but he wanted to get home like for breakfast. So he said, we're gonna leave like really early. So I wake up at like dark 100. We get out, we took off, and it's still dark. Right.
Yeah.
And by the time we get to New Orleans, we're going to stop in New Orleans and get gas so we can make it the rest of the way to Houston because the winds weren't favorable. And by the time we get to New Orleans, the sun is just poking up above the horizon. Right. So it's just sunrise as we get into New Orleans. And they're calling like 1/4 mile visibility on the runway, like in fog or something. And I'm looking down, and the runway is right there, and we can see the whole thing. I don't see any fog at all. It's completely clear. And so we're like, oh, it's okay. It's going to be fine. And we land and we come down and we get in the flare, right, as we're just about to touch down. And then everything goes white. I mean, it's just like a complete, you couldn't see anything anywhere, right? And the T-38 is extremely unforgiving if you get too slow, right? And in the flare, like
little
that.
baby wings. You need speed for the thing to fly because there's not much left. Little wings. Yep.
Tiny wings. You got to go fast. And also little skinny landing gear, which is not, you can't land hard either. The gear will collapse. And so this is an extremely dangerous thing when all of a sudden I can't see the runway anymore, nothing. And I see him moving the stick like this, like think, like he's searching for the runway. And then a wheel hits it like donk. Okay. And then the other wheel hits it donk, 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 donk. And the whole time I got my hands down here in the ejection seat, like ready to get the hell out of there. I'm like, I'm going to die with John Young. This is terrible. And then after he gets both wheels on the ground, he lets out this big whoop. He goes, woo-hoo! That's the closest I ever came to landing 0-0, which is zero visibility, zero ceiling. Meaning you can't see shit. Is basically what it means, which you're not supposed to do in the T-38.
No.
And I'm like, my hands are just shaking on the ejection seat handles. Yeah. And I'm like slowly letting go. And he's loving it.
Yeah.
So funny.
That's awesome. We were really lucky to have him, you know, to fly with too. You know, he probably was in his late 60s by that point, still flying T-38. So we were really lucky.
I think
he
he was in his 70s
around.
actually at that point, but
was he?
Yeah, it was
yeah, it was funny.
Remarkable. Like the other thing really quick I remember about him was I remember one day a bunch of us rookies because we had to wait a long time, right, to fly. We should mention this, that your class in '96, they called you what?
They called us the Sardines because we were the largest class that they ever selected. It was 35 Americans and 9 international students. So there was 44. So and the office was already, in their perception of the astronauts, there was already too many people. You know, they didn't want any more. We have enough people. We want to fly more. What do we need more guys? You know, but the 44 of us came in, 35 Americans, and so it was they were already tight. So they called us the Sardines. We're packed like sardines. So we were the Sardines.
Packed like sardines. So our class knew that we were gonna have to wait for all you guys to get a chance to fly before we were gonna get our turn, right? So we knew it was going to be a long time before they got through. All of you guys got to go into space. So you guys wanted to call us because the previous class gets the name, the incoming class.
Right. I want when you can tell your version, but I want to clarify on my end on this one. But go ahead. Yeah, but you're right.
I remember we were told that you guys wanted to call us the dodos because it's a flightless bird and we're going to have to wait forever. So we're a bird that doesn't fly. So we're going to be the dodos. And we objected. We didn't object to the flightless thing. That was a matter of fact, but but being extinct we thought was just going too far. So so we recommended penguins instead. We proposed that, and that eventually won, and so we were the penguins. So we had to wait a long time to fly. Do you want to tell your side of the story before I tell you the John Young?
We were trying. Yeah, you're right. The class before named you. They named us the Sardines. We didn't care. With your guys, it was like we knew that we weren't flying anytime soon, and we were a large class. You guys had how many in your class? You were almost as large, right? How many were in your class?
Yeah, I don't remember. We're in the somewhere in the low 30s, I think.
You were almost as big as we were, so that was another giant group of people coming in. And so we were like, they're never going to fly. They would kid us, and we're like, so the flightless bird. So there was people in my class that were saying we should call them the dodos, and I was like, it seems a little harsh, you know. So what I suggested was let's call them the penguins. I did, Garrett. I said let's call them the penguins, and their motto can be, "We'll fly when Houston freezes over," because instead of when we'll fly when hell freezes over, we'll fly when Houston freezes over, because Houston's a very hot place, and I thought that was very clever, and that's what I went with. But you're right, I got overruled and outvoted, and they wanted to name you guys the dodos, and then what you guys started doing was buying all kinds of penguin stuff. You had stuffed animal penguins, balloons. There was penguins everywhere, and you forced the name on. You forced the office to accept you as the penguins because dodos was supposed to be the name.
Yeah, there was a massive campaign that was waged. Right? There were these penguin tchotchkes all over the place. It was terrible.
At great expense. Luckily, the taxpayer didn't have to pay for it. This was a non-NASA initiative that you guys did.
That's right.
Yeah.
But so one day, a bunch of us penguins, I think some sardines too, are grumbling, bitching and moaning about how it's hard being an astronaut when you have to wait so long before you go into space. They're like, you go out and you meet with the public and they say, "What's it like in space?" And you have to say, like, "I don't know. My friends say it's nice." It's really embarrassing, It's like you're supposed to be an astronaut. You got the suit, you got the helmet and everything, and they're like, and you have to tell them that I've actually never been to space. And so we're moaning about that, and John Young overheard us. Okay, and he goes, "Let me tell you something. I know what that's like. I've been there. Like I had the same thing happen, and then you finally get to fly in space. Now, let me tell you something though. It never ends. All right, it never ends. And he goes, I finally flew in space, and then people would say, "Oh yeah, well, have you been to the moon?" No, I haven't been to the moon. And then he finally went to the moon, right? Yeah. And now he's all confident. He's like, And then they come up to him like, "Have you flown in space?" Like, "Yes, I have." "Have you been to the moon?" "Yes, I have." "How many times?" Give me a break. So he was really funny. He cracked us all up.
He told me I heard a version of that story from him where he said, "Have you flown in space?" And he's like, no, and then that's terrible. And then the next thing was that he did fly in space. Did you fly in space? And the answer was yes. And he'd be like, how many times? And he'd be like, well, just once. And then how many? You've been to space? How many? And then he's been twice. And he goes, I've been there twice. Have you been to the moon? And they're like, no. And then he went to the moon. He goes, have you been to the moon? Yes. And then he goes, did you walk on the moon? He's like, no. So then he walks on the moon. Finally gets to walk. That's the ultimate thing you can do. And they would ask him, have you been to space? And he's like, yeah. And he goes, how many? Have you been there more than once? And he's like, yeah. Have you been to the moon? Yeah. Have you walked on the moon? Yeah. How many times? It was always
they're never happy. The bastards.
Just once. So yeah, it never ends. It never ends. How many times?
It never ends.
Yeah, like only
never
once. Ends. Only one time you've walked on the moon. Yeah. So yeah, no, you're never going to impress anyone, Garrett. It's better to shut up. This is another John Young story related to that. He and I were coming into we were trying to get back and forth in one day. This was very important. And he also didn't want to come back at night. He wanted to get back to Houston before the sun went down, which was going to be tough. So we left as you said, we left really early. I think they opened I don't even know if they accommodated because they let us leave like around 5 or 6 a.m. Houston time. We get to Vegas and we're in a rush. He's like, we got to go. We got to get out there. We weren't rushing, but we didn't want to stay on the ground. So in our airplane, we needed a start unit to start our airplane. Remember? So we couldn't. A lot of airplanes you don't need. They have an auxiliary power unit. They can start the engine. But with the T-38, they needed what they called a huffer. It needed an air start unit that would blow air through the compressor to get the engine started. And we needed one of these things to start. So we land and get our fuel, and no time for like getting a sandwich or anything. We got to go. We got to get back. Next stop is out to Ames, out to California. So we're like, where's the start? So John's like, where's the start cart? And they're like, well, it's hooked up to that airplane over there. And it was a fancy airplane. This is Vegas. So it must have been like someone who gambled a lot or was a millionaire or something. It was a really fancy Lear jets, a Gulfstream or something like that. It was all fancy. And we're like, well, John's like, we need that thing to go. And he's like, we're not going to, this is one of our customers, one of our high level customers. We're not taking the huffer off that airplane. So John's like, we just need that thing for 5 minutes. We just 5 minutes, we'll be out of here. And they're like, sorry, sir, we have orders. We're not, that's like, I don't know who it was, but he wouldn't tell us. But it's some big gambler guy, and they're not. And they're talking to me like I'm the pilot, because John, as you said, was like in his late 60s. I was about 34 years old. So they're asking me. I'm like, he's the pilot in command. You got to talk to him. And John's like, I can't believe this. And I'm like, wait a minute. This is John Young. This guy walked on the moon. He's the first commander of the space shuttle. He's an American hero. So I was like, John, I got an idea. And he's like, what is it, Mike? And I go, tell him who you are. Tell him I'm John Young. I walked on the moon. He goes, no, Mike. I'm not doing it. We don't do that. And I go, why not? He goes, because it'll just make it worse. Then they can say, we didn't let a guy who walked on the moon out of here. So that's what the story was. Never try to impress anyone. Like, and he did not say a word of who he was. And we're just going to wait.
To the ground crew,
what's that?
Like, hey, I'm John Young. Don't you know who I am? I'm John Young. I walked on the moon, and then the ground crew is going to say, oh yeah, how many times?
Yeah, how many times? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, that's it.
So, we should probably wrap this up.
I don't know. Huh? Just can we take a break? Where are we? Just keep going. What? Oh,
hey guys,
so we want to wrap up, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, if you guys want to wrap up, that's totally cool.
Okay,
we should wrap up. I got one other story I want to tell about. And we need to edit this, obviously. But one other story I want to tell about.
We don't need to edit anything. Go ahead.
About the interview. So, so we'll just pick up here, okay? Ready?
Okay.
Okay. So, Mike, going back to
hold up, wait, go back to the interview for a second. I'm just going to cut to you quickly, so it makes the cut a little bit better, and go for it.
So, Mass, we were talking before about the interview week, and one other thing I remember about that I wanted to tell you was, it's a pretty stressful week, and really most of it, as you probably recall, was medical examinations. You had the 45-minute interview, which is the crux. But the rest of the time, you're getting ultrasounds, you're getting, X-rays, and they poke and prod. You learn a lot more about your body than you ever wanted to know, and that's really what most of the week is all about. And I remember this one point that there was this one guy that was in my interview class. His name was Patrick Sherman, and he would go on to become the center director at Stennis. He's a great guy, really funny guy. If they picked him instead of me, you could be doing this podcast with him because he'd be a funny astronaut. And we stayed really good friends. But anyway, he and I just hit it off, and we're just goofing around like this, like you and me, throughout the whole interview week. And at one point, they sent the two of us in to get our ultrasounds at a local hospital because NASA didn't actually have an ultrasound machine at the Johnson Space Center. So they just sent you to like the local hospital. And so we're sitting there. And of course, who goes to get ultrasounds? It's pregnant ladies, right? So it's Patrick and myself and an entire room full of pregnant ladies with like big giant bellies getting ready to go in and get their ultrasounds. And so I go in first, and Patrick is left all alone in this room full of pregnant women, like at least a dozen of them. And I come out after my exam is done, and he looks up at me, and I see him sitting there with all these pregnant ladies, and I walk out, and all I said was, Patrick, twins!
What did the ladies think?
They just laughed. Half of them were laughing. The other half were looking at me like, what an idiot. But I took, I'll take half. That's all right. It was fun.
Yeah, those exams, as you say, it's an astronaut interview, but it was all these, it was mainly medical exams. And as you say, they went everywhere. They looked everywhere. It was from head to toe, including inside certain places. And the procto was always the highlight of the week, which is not like a full colonoscopy, folks. Not for those of you who are medically inclined here. It's not, a colonoscopy is they're looking up your rear end and looking for things that don't belong there. And with us, it wasn't. They didn't go that far. And this thing, as you said, they did the ultrasound at a hospital, but this I remember they did at the Space Center. Mm-hmm. And so they just wanted to take a brief look. They weren't looking too far. Just let's go a little ways up. And this was like the thing. It was I thought it was like a rite of passage. They did it to all the astronauts in Apollo. This was just something they did to everybody. They want to make sure you're healthy, so they wanted to look inside of there. And I hadn't had anything like this done before. And because they did it locally, they didn't no anesthesia or anything. It was just this, this little procedure they were going to do, right? So I'm like, okay, what the heck? So I remember the doctor. The doctor's name was something like Dr. Hind. Do you remember this?
Dr.
It was like
Hind
or Hind, like that.
Dr. Hind.
The nurse.
It was nurse. You remember the nurse's name?
It was like Nurse Butt or something like that. I thought it was made up names. What was her name?
It was Nurse Mona. Mona. Okay, right. So Dr. Hines and Nurse Mona.
And I think that was really their names. I thought, I was like, you got to be kidding me. Because there was a lot of kind of silly jokes, about this thing. They're gonna see what they. So anyway, I remember that. And this guy was about 100 years old, I think. I think this is, they called him out of retirement for this. So, and I remember he was doing the thing, and I'm like, just kind of whatever, sitting, laying there, and he's looking. I know he's looking at something. So I'm like, "What are you looking at?" And he said, "I'm looking at the screen. Do you want to watch?" I'm like, "Sure, why not? Get the full effect of this experience." And he turns the thing toward me. And I'm looking at this. I'm like, I'm watching television, but it's an exploration of my inside, right? And I'm looking at this thing, and I'm kind of like, like what the heck is going? And he's like, "What are you trying to look?" He's like, "What are you? You interested?" And I'm like, "I'm just looking for my lost car keys." This guy, and I go, and I asked him, "You ever find anything? What do you expect?" Because I figured, who knows where all that stuff goes? Maybe he might come across it. But I remember him looking at that thing. But that was remember the big event. Like, oh, you're going to have that happen. And for me, it was the eye exam, because that was what I was most nervous about, because I was rejected by NASA. I sent in my application, was rejected twice, and then I got the interview, and I ended up failing the eye exam. I went in for the eye exam, and I failed. I didn't pass, and and I just couldn't see well enough. And I felt terrible about this because I was DQ'd, and they said, that's it. You can't even try anymore. And I remember going into work that I got that news on a Friday, and I went into work. I was working down at Houston for McDonnell Douglas, and my boss was a former astronaut, a guy named Bob Overmeyer. And I see him in the hallway, and he says, how did it go? And I go, I got medically DQ'd. I don't know what I'm going to do. And he said, was it the eye exam? And I go, yeah. How'd you guess? And he goes, that's what gets everybody. And he goes, you know what you got to do, Mike? He goes, I had to fight that. I hated that eye exam. I go, I hate it too. He goes, I hated it because that was the one thing would always get the most guys is you're not reading the eye chart. And for those of you listening at home, don't worry about this now. They've changed the standards. The acuity issue is no longer a problem like it was. But back then you had to see pretty well unaided. And I go, I don't know what to do. He goes, well, you know what you need to do. I go, I don't know. What am I going to do? He goes, you go take your eye exam again. He goes, make sure you're dehydrated. I go, really? He goes, well, I would always take my eye exam on a Monday, and I would start on Friday. I wouldn't drink any water. He goes, I would run. I would sweat. Everything out. I wouldn't drink anything, and I would get dehydrated, and that helps in the eye. I go, how is that? He said, well, what it is he had this whole thing. He's telling me he's like drawing something on a chalkboard. Oh, yeah, it makes it more rigid, and the light bends this way, and it really helps. You got to get rid of all the water in your body, dehydrate yourself. I go, oh, okay, maybe I can try it. Maybe I can see what I can do. Later that afternoon, that was in the morning. The afternoon, I'm walking around the Johnson Space Center, and I see Kevin Kriegel, who's an Air Force pilot. And I was friends with him. I knew him through church and the neighborhood and so on. And he goes, how did it go? And I go, I got medically DQ'd. He goes, the eyesight? He knew right away, just like all these pilots knew. It was the eyesight. And I go, yeah. He goes, you failed the eyesight? And I go, I did. He goes, you know what you got to do, don't you? And I go, what? He goes, you got to drink a lot of water. You got to hydrate. Like, what? I go, why? And he goes, well, it makes your eye more viscous, and there's more water, so the light bends better. And I go, you got to be kidding me, because I swear, you can't make this up. A couple hours earlier, I had one fighter pilot tell me, get all the water out of your system. And this guy's like, hydrate your eyeballs. Even pour the water right on the eye. Get as much water as you can inside of your. So I'm like, this is all hocus pocus. I've got to, no one knows how to pass this eye exam. And I started talking to some optometrists, and they didn't accept LASIK or any of that stuff. So I just had to figure out a way to see better. So I started doing something called vision training. And it was to try to trick your brain and your eyes into seeing better. And so I did this, and I was able to requalify. It was like you had to relax your eyes so you could focus differently. But in relaxing your eyes, you're actually it looked like I was giving someone an evil eye. It was like my eye was that's the way I was able to see a little bit better for this. This is the way this thing worked. And this lady that I worked with was this very nice optometrist doctor. When I went to see her, she said, I've never worked with anyone who was younger than the age of 10, because she could help kids because they could retrain their eyes and their brain because they're still developing. And I said, well, I tell you what, I can be very immature. No doubt about it. I can go in there and I could be the most immature patient you ever had. You won't even know it. So she agreed to work with me. And I, doing this, what I called the evil eye, but it was just relaxing my eyes to see a little bit better. I was able to pick up a couple lines and I was able to requalify to apply again. Not that they were going to take me, but at least I could apply again. So anyway, the big event comes now during. What's that?
Can you still do it? The evil
no,
eye?
it was like I can try to look like this, like this. It was like staring like this, Garrett. But it was actually relaxing your eyes to see a little bit better. Yeah. But I needed to kind of get into this trance almost, so I could. And you were trying to focus beyond the letter and all this other stuff. So the way they did that test, if you remember at NASA, was like a video game almost. You had to say you were up, down, left, right, or something, and it would flash this. It was called the Landau C. They'd flash a C, and it was different sizes, and you had to say where was the opening. You had to pick out where the opening. That's how they did this thing. So I'm in there really nervous about taking this test during the week, and they had a young student who was administering the exam, and I'm trying to do the evil eye, and she's like, you need to relax your eyes, and I go, I am relaxing my eyes. And she's like, no, you have to, don't do that with your eyes. And I go, well, I'm not squinting. It's like the opposite of squinting. I'm opening up as much as I can. She's like, no, you have to stop doing that. And I go, I'm thinking, this is my life here, okay? This is my fourth time. This is 10 years. I went through MIT, all this stuff. And now this very conscientious student was trying to tell me not to do the evil eye to see what I was, trying to relax my eyes. So she just wouldn't let me do it. And I'm like, I need to do. She goes, stop. And she would do the test again. And I'd be doing the evil eyes. She'd be like, stop, stop. And there was like screaming started to ensue. It's like, stop it, stop it. And then the eye doctor comes in and says, what is going on here? Because a student is helping out for the day, apparently. And she says, he's not relaxing his eye. I go, I am. She goes, you're not. I go, I am. So he's like, Mike, just come back tomorrow. Get a good night's rest, and I'll administer your test. And the day after tomorrow or something like that, whenever my schedule. So anyway, so I come. This is my last chance at this land I'll see test, and the optometrist is there. Is no longer the student. And he gives a test. And so, again, he just lets the program run. And I'm doing my best with this little video game. And you had to get like 80% of them right or something like that to pass. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what I did. I did my best. And it took a couple minutes to do this exam. And he's looking at the results. And I go, how did I do? How did I do, Bob? And he looks at me and goes, Mike, you passed. He goes, no kidding. Look at the results. You passed this thing. And I go, really? And I looked at him. He looked a little scared. And I go, what's the matter, Bob? And he goes, the look in your eye, I'm afraid you're going to kiss me. And that's what he was afraid of. He thought that was, but that whole thing with that medical thing that we were going through was you just didn't want to get DQ'd. You didn't want anything, whatever they were looking at. So I don't know if triplets would have, or twins would have DQ'd you, but luckily it didn't happen.
Yeah, you're right. So the as scary as the medical exam was, and the interview, and then it's over, right? And then comes a long wait, right? You got to you sit around, you wait for months because you don't get an answer right away. It takes it could take up like 4 or 5 months before they pick, and it's all done, and then they call you. And in that time, I have another brief John Young story, which is that while we were there for the interview, John Young came by and gave us a presentation on just how dangerous it was to fly the shuttle. And he had some statistical analysis that said it was like a 1 in 200 chance of death, which turned out to be wildly optimistic, unfortunately. But that's what he was. And so that I was thinking about, like, people are afraid, like my mom, flying on airliners. That's like 1 in 7 million, right? And this is 1 in 200, okay? This is not good odds. And it turned out to be 1 in 67. But anyway, it's even 1 in 200 is terrifying, right? Yeah. So, and he goes, and by the way, you should know this. This is John Young. He was half kidding, I think, but this is true. He said you should know your life insurance won't cover you. He goes, it's a special. There's always an exclusion. You have to, if you want to be insured, you need to get special riders and stuff. So I remember that. And I'm sitting at home waiting to find out if I was selected for months. And as the months are going by, you're getting more and more paranoid and like nervous about the whole thing. And one day my phone rings and I picked it up because you every time the phone rang, I would jump on it because it could be NASA calling, right?
You never know.
So I pick up the phone and it's not NASA. It's some guy trying to sell me life insurance. He starts going into his whole sales pitch, his whole spiel. And he's going on and on about the policy. And excuse me. I just want to know, does this policy cover dying on a rocket, like launching it like a space shuttle? And I hear, he goes, what? I'm like, like if you're on a space shuttle and it blows up, will this cover you? And then I hear, click. He hung up on me. I got one of his callers to hang up on me. And so, by the way, if you're listening to this, feel free to use that. If you get a call from somebody trying to sell you life insurance and you want to get rid of them, just ask them if it covers blowing up on the space shuttle, and they'll hang up on it. So
he may have just thought you were crazy. But I had after I was selected, I had an insurance. I think it was my car and home insurance company called about getting life insurance. So I was like, all right, here's my chance. And we were able to get life. We were able to get it through the government. No one else would sell it to us, but the government, I think, legally had to give us some sort of insurance. And we had to pay for it, of course. But I remember I got that call like that, and I was like, oh, what the hell? Let me give it a try. I think I was an astronaut for about 10 years already. And, so the guys ask, and he goes, what's your occupation? I'm an astronaut. He goes, you're what? And I go, I'm an astronaut. He goes, oh, we can't insure you. I go, wait a minute. You're the salesman. He goes, no. I go, if I was like a fighter pilot, right? He goes, oh, yeah, we can insure you then. I go, is there any occupation that you would be able not to insure? Like, he goes, no, only astronauts. We will not insure any life insurance on any of you people. I go, thanks very much. I'll tell my family. They'll be thrilled. So, yeah, that was it. That's a surefire way to get him to hang up on you. This guy didn't hang up, though. This guy, was like, I'm really sorry, we can't do anything.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you're more believable than I am. So, anyway, we should wrap this up. We should wrap this up.
We should.
I think that's pretty good first episode.
Yeah. I don't know. I think so, but it's not for us to judge. I don't know if anyone's still listening.
Yeah, we'll find out. But thanks for hanging with us.
Yeah,
it's been fun having you with us on Two Funny Astronauts.
Two Funny Astronauts. That's episode 1 in the books, and stay tuned for episode 2. Will be coming shortly.